Alright, today is Daf Kuf Yud Ches, Tuesday's Daf. It's another airport lounge one, so we'll hope for the best. So I apologize in advance for our background soundtrack. But yesterday we got to start our Erva Reitev, all about Tumah and Tyra. We introduced the idea of the Shomer, of that which is to protect the Pri or the Basar or whatever we're talking about. Today we're going to get more into Yadais as well, those handles and things that are there to hold the thing we're talking about. So yesterday we started the Gemara which brought the Brisa, that there is a halacha of Shomrim for Tumah Kala, meaning for Tumah Seichlim, because of Zera Zerua. And now we're going to pick it up 3 lines from the bottom of Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, V'lo Shomrim l'Tumah Chamura Minolan. And how do you know there is no halacha of Shomrim klape the Tumah Chamura of a Tumas Nevela? The Tana Rabbanan, because the Brisa says B'nivlasa, because it says by a Nevela that its Nevela should be Tameh. And we darshan V'loi Ba'ar She'ein Alav Kazayas Basar. And not if you're just touching the skin, just the ar of the Basar that's not a Kazayas, that doesn't have a Kazayas Basar attached to that ar, moving over Tamid Aleph. And Yochel Hanagea Keneged Basar Me'achur of Loye Tameh. I might think that even if you touch the other side of that ar, the other side where the meat isn't, then maybe you won't even become Tameh. Talmud Lemer Yitma, that you should be Tameh. Now, my Omer, what in the world does this Bryce even mean? If you're telling me we're Mamayat the Ur from passing along the Tumah, and there's not even a Kazayas of Basar attached to it, why would you become Tameh if you touch the opposite side of the Ur? That should be less of a reason to become Tameh. Amar Rava, the Amar Lakadi, which is the name of an Amira, or perhaps it means it's anonymous. Chesuri Mechsera V'hachi Ketani, this you have to read the Brysa. B'nivlasa, if you touch the Nevela, you're going to be Tameh, which sounds like it's only going to be the Basar. V'loi Ba'ar She'ein Alav Kazayas Basar V'ar Mashlima L'Kazayas. But not the Ur that has less than a Kazayas of Basar on it, even when that Ur would be Mashlim to that kazayas. And Yachol Shani might say af or she'ein alav kazayas basar. And you might think that even if it does have a kazayas basar, but hanageh keneged basar me'achurav Yachol lo yehi tameh, that you're not even going to be tameh if you touch the other side of that arva filo ma'ase yad nami layav, and it doesn't even function as a yad, which is now we're introducing this idea of a yad. Talmud Leimer yitma. That's what the Brisa meant, that you're going to be tameh when you touch the other side of the ar where the basar isn't, because there is a kazayas basar on the other side, and it acts as a yad. Tanan Hasam, the first Mishnah in Masechta Uktzin says, Kol shehu yad v'lei shomer. If something's a yad, but it's not a shomer. And what's an example of something that's a yad, but not a shomer? Rashi gives us a simple example of, let's say you have a bone that's holding your chicken leg. So you're holding a bone, it doesn't have any marrow in it. So it only serves the purpose of being a yad, because it's a handle for that basar. Or the Rambam and the Rabbeinu Gershom give the example of a branch or a stem of a fruit. So they only serve the purpose of being a yad and not being a shomer to that pri or that basar. The halacha is tameh. It can become tameh. Umetame, and it can actually transmit tumah. Ve'ena mitzdaref, but it's not going to be mitzdaref with the food in order to make a shear for tumas oichlin. The tameh, according to Rashi, is talking about the oichel. That's the noun over here. According to the Rambam, it's actually talking about the yad itself. And the way the Stipler understands the machlekes rishonim is the classic lumdisha machlekes about how do we look at yadis in general. Is that an extension of the pri? Is that what the Torah is saying? Or no, it's not an extension of the pri, but rather it's a way to transmit the tumah. And there are nafkaminas. The Makar Baruch says, let's say if I take that little branch or that yad and I bring it into the Beis HaMikdash by itself, if you're learning it's actually tameh itself because it's part of the pri, so then in a chanami you're going to be chayiv. But if it's just a way to transmit the tumah, so it itself is not really tameh. Perhaps there could be another nafkamina whether you can use it for schach if it's a dover that's actually makabel tumah or not. But getting back to our Mishnah Nuktzin here, something that's a yad and not a shomer is tameh umetame ve'ena mitzdaref. Shomer yafal pisha in a yad. Let's say something is a shomer. It's protecting that's what's inside of it, even if it's not a yad, like a piece of skin of an animal, and it has a kazayis basar attached to that skin, that ur. But it's not a yad. You don't use it as a handle. The halacha is tameh. It itself is tameh. Umetame, it can be metame others. Umitzdaref, but lo yad v'lo shomer. If it's neither one, like let's say the fuzz that's on some peris, it doesn't protect, and it's also not used to hold the peri. Lo tameh v'lo metame. And now let's look for the makaris. Yadais heichi ksifi. So we got 3 makaris over here. Dichsiv v'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafal minivlasam alav tameh hulachem. If it becomes wet and then the sheretz falls on it, it's going to become tameh. This is the makar for hechsher tameh as we mentioned yesterday. So we darshan lachem lechel shebetzarchechem. And what are the tzarchechem? That any of these tzarchechem can accept the tumah. L'Rabbi says hayodais, that's including even a yad for the tumah. Uchesiv, and it says number 2, v'chiyomus min habehema asher hi lachem. If one of the kosher animals dies, it's going to transmit tumas nevela. So we darshan lachem lakol shebetzarchechem. L'Rabbi says hayodais, and therefore we darshan yad is lahachnes ulahaitzi. It can become tameh and it can make others tameh. So that's all about yad. But shomer lahachnes ulahaitzi leitzarach kra. You don't even need to have a pasuk for a shomer because kal v'chaymer miyad dasi. Once I establish yad, it's a kal v'chaymer to the shomer because my yad sheina makia machnes umaiti. A yad yad that doesn't even protect the thing that's attached to, still it's machnas and maitzi tuma, shomer like kol shekain, that's more connected to the thing. It actually protects the thing itself. For sure, it should have that ability to be machnas and maitzi tuma. So shomer dekasav rachman alamli. So why does the Torah even talk about a shomer? Because that was the zera zerua that we said at the end of yesterday's daf, that the zera is encased by this protective shomer. Why does the Torah even need to mention it? So shma mina l'tzaref. It's not coming to tell you that it's machnas and maitzi, but rather it's coming to tell you that third halacha that has the ability to be mitzdaref to be able to achieve the shear for tumas eichlin. And when we talk about the shear of tumas eichlin, there is an important distinction between being tameh and being metame. According to the Rambam, even a chardol, even a kolshu, the teeniest thing can become tameh. The whole issue of being kibeya is only to be metame. The Rambam himself only limits that issue of needing the beya to be metame by a dover yavesh. By a dover lach, it would be even a kolshu who could be metame. You don't need to have the shear. Frak the Gemara. The psukim that we brought, maybe that only shows us that the yad can actually bring the tumah into the eichel, but it can't be metame something else. And shomer lahachnas ulahaitzi. And a shomer could go both directions. Avol yad lahaitzi v'shomer l'tzaref loy. And therefore you don't have any mucker in the Torah about tziruf, which the Gemara answers no. Because yad lahachnas v'lei lahaitzi loy motzes amrit. You're not going to tell me that the yad can only bring the tumah in but can't put the tumah out. Because hashta ayule ma'alya afuke mi boy. If it can be machnas the tumah into the eichlin, you'd need to tell me that you can be mitzi the tumah. It's a bigger chiddush that the yad could be machnas it in the first place. So if you're telling me that the Torah says that a yad can be machnas tumah, kal v'chomer the yad can be metame. Well, ve'ema yad lahaitzi v'lei lahachnas. Okay, so say it the other way around. Maybe the yad can only be mitzi the tumah from those eichlin, but it can't actually bring the tumah in. And shomer lahaitzi ulahachnas. And the shomer goes both directions because it's more intrinsic to the actual peri. Avol yad lahachnas v'l'shomer l'tzaref leba. Maybe there is no tzirif still. And for the Gemara, yad yaseriksiv. There's an extra yad. Tanur v'kirayim yutatz v'gaimer. That the pasuk over there at the end of Parsha Shmini says when that keli, that oven becomes tameh, you got to destroy it. Lochem lakol shebetzarchechem, which we darshan l'rabbi says ayadais. So since we have this additional drasha of yad, we certainly don't need two psukim to tell me that a yad can be mitzi and be matama other things. So one of them is coming to tell you that can also be machnas the tumah. So therefore we still have this kal v'chomer that tells us by a shomer can both be tameh and be matame, leaving us the additional pasuk to tell us the tziruf for the shomer. Okay, well hay minayo miyater. Which one of these different psukim about a yad is going to be extra? Because I'll show you chumras by all of them. Lichtay brachman b'zroyim v'leisu hanach minayo. If you're only going to tell me the one about zroyim that we had at the end of yesterday's daf, I would say the uniqueness of mal zroyim shekain to mosin meruba. There's more shaychus of tumah to zroyim than there is by the tanur, because they can become tameh from a rishon, whereas the tanur can only become tameh from an avatuma. So they're to mosin meruba. And lichtay brachman b'tanur v'leisi hanach minayo. Let's say you only want to keep the yades of tumah lagabe the tanur, and therefore we'd learn the halachas of zroyim and nevela from the tanur. I would say mal tanur shekain matama me'avira. It has that special uniqueness. It's more chomer that it can convey the tumah al yedei its own airspace, whereas zroyim and nevela you have to actually have some sort of negia or contact or masa or something like that. And lastly, lichtay v'rachmana v'nevela v'leisi hanach minei. If you want to only have the yades by nevela, learn from the others. Well, mal nevela shekain matama adam, which is certainly unique. Umitama b'masa, which is also a uniqueness by tumas nevela. And v'tumah yoytza migufa, and it itself is a source of tumah as opposed to just being a conduit. Tumas nevela itself puts out its own tumah. So certainly you're not going to want to use the yades only by nevela to learn to zroyim and to tanur. So none of them are really extra, which the Gemara says chada mechada loyasya. You're right, you can't learn from one, but tesi chada metarti, but you could learn one of them from the other two. Well, let's go through. Hi tesi, which one should not be said and therefore learn from the other two? Leilichtav rachmana b'zroyim v'tesi v'hanach. Skip that one, learn it from nevela and tanur. I will say mala hanach shekei metamen shlei behechsher. You don't need a hechsher for nevela and for tanur. They can become tamei without hechsher al kabel tum. But timer b'zroyim she'ein metamen ela behechsher. Avadi, you need to have a hechsher from the yad shachadam liquids to be machsher zroyim. Omar Rav Huna b'rei Rabbi Yeshua. You know why that's not a good taina? And I'll tell you, they really are daima one to the other. An amazingly interesting lumdish line here. Peiros shalei huchshru ketanur shalei nigmar malachte dami. When you look at peiros that are not huchshru al kabel tumah because they're not wet, they're just like that tanur shalei nigmar malachte. They are not finished, which is probably the most open and obvious raya to the shitas Rashi and the chinuch. Because there is a Yedua Dika Machlekes Rashi and Chinuch connected the Ramban about why is there this musig of Hechshel Kabel Tumah. How do we understand it? According to the Ramban, when peiros become wet, you kind of open up their spiritual pores. Now they have the ability to be a conduit for Tumah. Tumah can get into it once you or make them wet. But Rashi and the Chinuch have an understanding that when peiros are unwashed, they're not yet done. They're like this. They are unfinished. There's no Gemar Malacha. And that's really what this Gemara seems to be saying. That peiros Shalei Huchshru is Ketaner Shalei Nigmar Malach the dummy. So it's not so unique about that hechsher. And therefore, if Yodes would have been said by Tanur and Nevela, we could have learned it also to Zroyim. So, okay, I'll tell you what, I have a different pircha then. You can't compare the Zroyim to the Nevela and Tanur because they can be makabel tuma without touching any of the sources of tuma. Timer b'Zroyim she'ein metaman ela b'negia. Okay, so we'll give up on that, and then let's go the other way. Let's only have Yodes written by Nevela and Zroyim, and then learn out to Tanur. But I'll say malahanoch shekein oichel. Nevela and Zroyim are both oichlin, as opposed to the Tanur, which is not an oichel. So okay, let's try our third possibility then. Skip Nevela, learn it from Tanur and Zroyim. So Yad Nevela Lam. And why do I need the Torah to say Yad by a Nevela? Im Eina Inyan Liyad Nevela, Tneu Inyan Liyad Da Alma, which means that just like the Yad can be Maitzi Tuma, this additional Yiter of Yad will tell us that you can also be Machnes Tuma into it. And since the Torah is telling us Yodes by Eichlin that the Yad can be Maitzi Tuma, so the extra mentioning of a Yad by Tumas Eichlin will tell us that you can also bring in and be Machnes the Tuma into the Eichel. So, and we fear ice, Yad La Hachnes, Yad La Haitzi, and Shomer is Litzaref. That's our halacha that we started off with. But I still need to have Yad for Nevela. You can't learn to something greater than where it's coming from. You can't learn more to Nevela than you had by the Tanur and the Zroyim. And Mahanoch le Matama Adam, just like by Tanur and Zroyim, you can't be Matama a person, af Nevela le Matama Adam, which we know is not true. So we have a problem of Dayai. And that's why we would need to have the pasuk of Yad by Nevela written. Okay, you're right. So Ella, we're going to have to say a different shot. Yad de Nevela mitzvach tzarech. We need Nevela, v'shomer de Nevela hu de light tzarech. We never need to say anything about a shomer lagabi Nevela. So Lamai helchas akas ve'rachmana. Why do we even mention anything about a shomer and Nevela? It's tarufe. If it's to tell me the halacha of tzir of using the shomer to get to the shear of tuma amr le mitzdaref. You already told me that a shomer of a Nevela, which is a tuma chamura, is not going to be mitzdaref. Ulahaiti, and to tell me that the pasuk is saying that a shomer has the ability to be mitzi tuma. Well, kal v'chomer miyadasi. I would have known that from the yad, because the yad is even less connected. So there's a kal v'chomer. Say elam ein inyan l'shomer de Nevela, t'neu inyan liyad de Nevela, v'me'ena inyan liyad de Nevela, t'neu inyan liyad de Alma. And since the Yodes by Eichlin tells me that the yad can be mitzi tuma, so too from the extra word it'll tell me that you could also be machnes the tuma. And therefore, again we fear ice, yad la haitzi, yad la hachnes, v'shomer l'tzaref. Turning over to Tamid Beis, frek the Gemara, ve'ema im ena inyan l'shomer de Nevela, well t'neu inyan l'shomer de Alma. And therefore we can say shomer la hachnes, v'shomer l'tzaref. Avol yad la hachnes lay, but maybe we don't have the ability for the yad to bring the tuma in since we don't have a pasuk for that anymore. Okay, so you know what the Gemara says? The fact that the yad is machnes tuma is not going to come from the extra yad in the pasuk. It's going to be a different mocker. El miikara ki ksiva yad ahachnasa ksiva. Lechatchila, when the Torah was talking about a yad, it was talking about the hachnasa. And once we can establish that the yad can be machnes, we now have that kal v'chomer as we originally said beforehand that it can be mitzi. Well then, el shomer de Nevela lamali. Why do I even need to mention the shomer? Which the Gemara says legufei ulamai. And what halacha are we talking about? What's that halacha legufei that we need? Ilitz tarufei amar le mitzdarf. We know that the shomer of a Nevela, because it's a tumah chamura, is not mitzdarf to make the shear for the basar. And ila hachnes ulahaitzi kal v'chomer miyad asya. So I don't need that either. So what's the gufei that we're talking about? So the Gemara, you're right. Milsa dasya v'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav lakra. So sometimes you don't really have to have that extra halacha. Well, if that's the case, shomer de alma a molach lahachnes. Whenever the Torah talks about the shomer lagabe any eichlin, maybe I'll tell you that all it's coming to tell you is the ability of lahachnes and lahaitzi tuma. Milsa dasya v'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav lakra. And I'll use that same idea that we don't need to have any new drasha. It's just milsa dasya v'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav lakra. To which the Gemara says no, because hechadikal medrash darshin. And if I have something to darshan, I'm not going to just simply say Torah was tarach v'kasal lakra. I'll use it. Rav Chaviva Omar Shani Shomer de Nevela. In general, the shomer of Nevela is going to be different because kivan demaisa yad ka'ovid. Since the purpose that it serves is to act as a yad, in other words, to bring the tuma in, but not to be mitzdaref. So since it serves that kind of a purpose like a yad shadinan lei, we'll use the pasuk by the shomer of Nevela, which is more daima to the yad of Eichlin than a shomer of Eichlin, because it really has the characteristic of the delivery mechanism of tuma, like by the yades of Eichlin, and we can learn from it that the yad can also be machnes as well as be mitzi tuma. But getting back to the beginning of the brisa that was the end of yesterday's daf about kol zera zerua. Maskef lo Rav Yehuda bar Shmuel. Hold it now. What about the Mishnah in the second parak of Uktzin where it says hapitma shel rimain mitzdarefes? The pitaim, that stem of the rimain, is going to be mitzdaref for the shear of tumas eichlin, but vahanetz, but that flowery thing on top, shel le'ena mitzdaref. But v'yamai, why should the pitam be mitzdaref? Karikan al kol zera zerua. In order to achieve a tziruf, you need to be able to use the pasuk al zera zerua v'leka, and you don't have that because a rimain is not a zera, because people don't plant pomegranate branches. It doesn't fit that characteristic, and the pitum would have fallen off anyway if you'd plant it. V'suha detanam, we also learned in the Mishnah how arva reitev akifa v'chulu mitzdaref l'tamei tumas eichlim. So Minolan, how would you even know that about ar and basar? That whole pasuk is only talking about zrayim. Ela tlasa krei ksivi must be because there are multiple expressions in the pasuk. I'll call zera zerua asher yizoreya. Chad l'shaymer dizrayim. One tells me that the shaymer of these zrayim is going to be mitzdaref. V'chad l'shaymer di'ilanais. And idach l'shaymer basar beitzim v'dagim. So nechanami, even though the pasuk literally is only talking about zrayim, but the additional zera expressions that we have there, zera, zerua, yizoreya, will refer to all these different kinds of categories. Amar Rav Chia Barashi Amar Rav, an important machlekes, yesh yad l'tuma ve'in yad lehechsher. For Rav Yochanan Amar, yesh yad l'tuma ulehechsher. How do we look at the yad? Does it only connect for tuma or also for hechsher? Meaning, if you take that yad and you make it wet, does that make the food now huchsher l'kabel tuma? B'maikam eflagi, iba yisem asvara, iba yisem akra. Iba yisem akra, either it's how you darshan the pasuk, because marsavar mikra nidrash lefanav v'lei lefnei fanav. It's how far back in that same pasuk can you go backwards? Because the pasuk says v'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafel min v'lasam alav v'tamihu lachem. So does the halacha of yades go back to the hechsher or only to the tuma? So it's just about how you read the pasuk, or marsavar mikra nidrash lefanav v'lei lefnei fanav. So that's version one of their machlekes, how you read the pasuk, or iba yisem asvara, that mar savar hechsher tchilas tumahu. It's the beginning of that tuma. Umar savar hechsher lav tchilas tumahu. This sounds a little bit more like that Ramban that we talked about. That hechsher is the tchilas tuma because it opens up the spiritual pores, if you will, to transmit the tuma. Tanya kavasi Rav Yochanan, kishem sheyesh yad l'tuma kach yesh yad lehechsher, ukishem she'in mekablan tuma ela lekishiyit l'shu, kach ein mekablan hechsher ela ad shiyit l'shu. So you see, this brisa really is going like Rav Yochanan. That's yesh yad l'tuma u lehechsher. And we're going to call it here, and we'll pick it up with a Marav for tomorrow.